Working at Glen Grant is not a job for me, it's a way of life. And when I leave the house in the morning and close the door, which came off the Major's mansion house, which was knocked down in 92, I feel I'm shaking hands with the Major every day. And I'm not going to work, I'm going to my second home, because Glen Grant Distillery has been my life.
I'm Christopher Coates, editor of Whisky Magazine. I've travelled to Speyside, a region that's home to more distilleries than any other in Scotland, to visit one of the longest-serving distillers in the world of whisky. One of the true greats of the industry, Dennis Malcolm's name has become synonymous with that of the Glen Grant, the distillery he calls his second home and the heart of his life. Recently, the Glen Grant honoured its master distiller's legacy by releasing the oldest whisky ever bottled by the distillery. A single malt matured in a single sherry butt for 60 years, which is exactly how long Dennis has been working in the whisky industry. Inducted into the Whisky Magazine Hall of Fame in 2014, this legendary whisky maker was awarded an OBE by Her Majesty the Queen in 2016 for his services to Scotch whisky and the Speyside community. But far from being a man of titles, rank and accolades, to his friends, family, colleagues and the people of Speyside, he's just Dennis.
He's like in with the foundations of the distillery. You think Glen Grant, and everybody within the industry think of Dennis. That's just the way it is.
Hello, Dennis. Good to see you.
And you, welcome to Glen Grant.
Always happy to be here.
That's good. Let's go and see this distillery now then.
You have a few peers in the industry. There's a few other master distillers out there, and some that have nearly worked in the industry as long as you, but very few people can say that they were born on the site of the distillery, that they then went on to manage. So what was that like growing up here? It's
my second home, and when I was a wee boy, I used to play in the grounds here because we've got massive grounds, Victorian garden, etc. So it was lovely to be able to play in the grounds. And when your father worked here and your grandfather before you, you were allowed into the plant after 5 o'clock, which was lovely because it was interesting, and you did what you're told because your dad worked here. You know, 27 acres of an orchard and gardens up here to run about and play in as well. So there was no TV when I was a wee boy. You know, TV was thing of the future for us then. Most people went out and played with their friends, and also maybe 20-a-side football in the playing fields. 3 little streams in the village here, so we used to go and look for trout and fish for trout and girl for trout. So it was great. We found our own entertainment.
So obviously a lot of people come here today to visit for the Spirit of Speyside Whisky Festival, and something that almost everybody says when they come is that they don't just come for the whisky, because to be honest they can quite often get the whisky at home, and they come for the people and the community in this area. What was the community like growing up here? Was it quite connected?
Yeah, the community was very important when I was growing up. You know, there were 5 distilleries, and most of the people employment was in farming or distilling. So everyone, it was one huge big family, you know. And I remember, to justify that is, most people once a year walked from the church to the railway station, when we were at the railway station, and everyone went onto the train. The village emptied, and we all went to the Sunday school picnic once a year down at Lossiemouth and then to Hopeman. So very much one big happy family in Rothes.
It was perhaps these happy formative years in Rothes that inspired Dennis to give so much back to the community.
Dennis is well known in Rothes. He's lived here all his life, and Dennis is well known everywhere and by everyone. He's very nice, very kind person.
He works hard for the community. He is a Rothes man through and through.
He's an elder of the Church of Scotland, and he's also the convener of the church as well. So he plays a big role in the community. And until recently, he was also on the board of the local school district, and he was a justice of the peace.
I think he does other things in the community, but sort of behind the scenes, if you like. That's what he wants to do. Looks after a lot of the older people, and especially ex-employees of Glen Grant as well. Likes to go around and have a joke with them and speak about old times, which not enough a lot of people do that nowadays. The world's moved on.
Just as Dennis has become a treasured figure in the Speyside community, since its founding, the Glen Grant Distillery itself has played a key role in Rothes and the wider Moray region.
I think you don't have to go very far to find someone who drinks whisky in Rothes. With 5 distilleries, 5 pubs, and an average of 1,500 people, I think that's a perfect balance.
So why do you think the founder chose Rothes as a place to put his new distillery?
They picked this area because it was an abundance of water, they had their own water supply here, and they weren't far from Lossiemouth, which is 16 miles away, and that, at that time, was a deep sea port. You know, they used to build ships and that there, so just imagine, how do you get coal to heat your stills? It comes by boat into Lossiemouth. And where did your cask come from? Spain, Portugal, all sherry in these days, so in by boat. Perfect area, so they come from with horse and cart or steam lorries by then. And then, of course, one of the founders founded the railways, which made it lovely for him to take his carts in and out from the seaport and his coal.
So the distillery really had a profound effect on the area then?
I would say so, more so with the railways, because when he founded the railways in 1852 and in 1858 up to Rothes, the government then took over and carried on with the railways all the way up Speyside. But that was a super supply chain for the whole of Speyside, and Speyside, as you know, is the heart of the whisky industry, so it couldn't be better for the industry.
So I've heard a few people say that, you know, without the railways, Speyside wouldn't be what it is today and certainly wouldn't have the reputation that it has today.
But I think it was always going to be a whisky region because it was far enough away from the authorities in London and all these wee glens, etc. So it was always the way. But the railways did service all Speyside, and that made it easier for the distilleries to get their whisky, their casks down to the lowlands, to the bottling halls, because in these days the bottling halls were all down there.
However, the railways, and particularly the Rothes train station, also played one very important role in Dennis's life early on.
The train would stop there every morning at 6:20 because I come in the morning, and I had to start at 6:30 in the morning. My father had been in night shift, so I was in the cooperage, so he'd come home just about 6:10 from his work. He'd come in the door and just shout, "Time you're up, Dennis." And Dennis would, like any other young guy, would just lie there for a while. And then you'd hear the train, you know, because it tooted when it moved off. It was 6:20, so you had to get out fast to get up here.
Though Dennis claims he needed the train's whistle to get him up in the morning, for as long as anyone else can remember, he's been full of energy and always on the go.
I'm not joking. I was sprinting after him. He's probably one of the most energetic people that you'll ever meet.
I first met Dennis when I came to work here in Speyside, and Dennis was a colleague, and I was absolutely bowled over by this guy with all the curly hair who was just a bundle of enthusiasm. Wherever he went at double quick speed, he just got on with things and empowered people or enthused people to do whatever it was they were meant to be doing.
Just remember this very tall, very thin man with dark curly hair and thick black rimmed glasses running past the office. Since then, I've always known that Dennis never really does walk anyway. He's always running or almost running.
Of course, before becoming the energetic distiller he's known as today, Dennis was just a young Rothes boy looking for his first job. So obviously your dad worked here, your granddad worked here. So was it a foregone conclusion that you'd end up working here too, or did you have to go through a rigorous interview?
No, there was no interview. At the time, the owner was Douglas McKessick, and he said any employee who had a boy or a girl leaving school age looking for some work and was at Glen Grant, just tell them to come up to Glen Grant. So that was my interview, was basically just arrive, you know, and start at Glen Grant. But basically, I wanted to be a cooper. I liked working with wood, so I thought it was amazing how a cask can hold in liquid that's thinner than water. So I wanted to be a cooper, you know.
So you knew you had a job here. What was it like turning up on that first day? Do you remember it?
I remember it, I'll never forget it, because it was quite a traumatic day for me, you know, getting up early in the morning, wearing dungarees and boots. I walked up to where we are just now, And this was a cooperage here on our left-hand side, a building with big double doors with the old-fashioned sneck, as they called it, you know, push your thumb on it. When I came to the door, I didn't go in. I was very nervous. I heard noises of hammers. I knocked on the door and nobody stopped. The noise didn't stop, so I knocked again and then there was silence. Opened the door a tiny little bit and just slunk into the back of the door and shut the door and stood there. And, you know, Christopher, they all stopped. They just stared at me, you know, and I felt really uncomfortable, you know, but they did it on purpose.
Before Dennis could set about learning how to build casks, his first task was to make his own hammer.
And the head cooper said, you made a good job of that. Did you do that yourself? And I said, no, I got help. You know, yeah, I couldn't be anything else but honest at the time.
So what kind of work were you doing as a cooper here? Was it just repairing or was there something else going on?
Well, initially, every cask gets checked to see that it's fit for filling, and the hoops get hardened, and then they get stenciled and into the cooperage, into the filling store for filling. But we started building our own casks as well as repairing. So that was the early 60s when the bourbon casks came over from America. They came over as shooks, dismantled, you know, so we had to rebuild them again. So we did that here.
But it sounds like you enjoyed your time as a cooper.
I loved it. It was a creative sort of job, you know, and you had to make sure that quality counted then as well, because that casket you made had your own identifying mark on them. When they were filled, went to warehouse, if that cask leaked 5 or 10 years later and the head cooper saw it, he would remember you, because he knew your mark, his trademark, you know.
So there was real accountability in there then?
Oh, sure. Quality was important then as well.
This commitment to quality endures in everything Dennis does, and it's something that's earned him much respect from his peers. But it wasn't just this professionalism that made him popular.
Dennis is known by everyone. He has always got a story to tell, he's always got a joke to crack, but his knowledge is as in-depth as his wit and sense of humour. And there's everywhere you go, people are asking after Dennis.
He's a charismatic guy that he's very much a people person and looks after everybody very well.
Well, very much it's his generosity and his kindness that everybody knows.
I think it's his attitude to life. I mean, he's full of enthusiasm. He loves life. I mean, he's got so much energy and he imparts so much wisdom. I mean, it's just great to be around Dennis. Just a lovely guy.
But being well-liked and good at coopering wasn't enough for Dennis. He wanted more. So at some point you must have made the decision that you didn't want to make casks anymore and you wanted to come inside here and make whiskey.
Well, it was quite simple because most people when they're young are inquisitive and I wasn't any different. I wanted to know exactly how the liquid that went into these casks that I was making was made. So I then started a 6-year basically apprenticeship on production, from malt intake, milling, mashing, fermentation and distillation to the new spirit going into the casks.
So was moving from the cooperage into shift work in the production side of things, was that a big change for you?
Yeah, it was actually, because I loved creating things and that's why I was a cooper. But here I was learning new skills and there was guys who'd been here for donkey's years doing production, so I learned a lot from these guys with all the experience that they had.
So the young Dennis ended up in the perfect position for an aspiring young whiskey maker. His mentors had all the knowledge and experience, while he had all the energy and willingness to learn.
And days gone by, you'd maybe say 5-10 years in each position, you know, dunroom stills, mashers, before you became a production sort of brewer or manager. And they were all hundreds of years of experience, and I'm just this young, really keen and interested young guy, so I knew I wasn't going to fail. It was no way in my mind could I fail, because I had hundreds and hundreds of years of experience teaching me how to do it. I was basically their project, you know, and they didn't want a failed project.
How did you work your way up from, you know, starting shift work up all the way up to brewer eventually? Did you have it all mapped out?
No, I didn't really plan it out, you know. I became very interested in production and seeing how the distillery was run. And then most young people are ambitious, so I wanted then to be in total control, not just be able to make cask and be able to produce it. I wanted total control of it, so maybe I was slightly ambitious then.
Dennis was seen as the modern distillery manager at the time. I remember as a young manager, he was taking over a very old traditional distillery that was needing to move with the times, and Dennis was a person that's done that.
Although Dennis was moving to management, that didn't mean he was taking a desk job.
You know, I was young when I took over running Glen Grant, and the challenge of doubling the production of the plant while still operating at full capacity was absolutely fantastic for me. I felt I'd achieved something rather than shutting it down and expanding it like most people do. The distillery saw the need to expand, and in 1973 we doubled the size of the distillery, which was fantastic because we knocked down our maltings, built a new shed there for housing the stills, then 2 stills in 1973, so that gave us 6 stills, and we did this during the distillery still working, so that was a challenge for us, and that kept us really busy. It was wonderful, and that's what happened 100 years before that. The young major who took over in 1873 doubled the size of the distillery, so we did the very same 100 years later.
The present day Glen Grant is what Dennis has delivered over the years, the new mash tun at the still house, etc. And a lot of these things has been accomplished by Dennis, and a lot of hard work put into that as well.
So you said that you were the brewer, which is the production manager, so you were in charge of actually making the whiskey at the site. The term that people are usually more familiar with today is distillery manager, but you also had a distillery manager back then, and so what was the difference?
Distillery manager at that time was in the office buying and selling and recording all the delivery orders from one company to another. So he was completely involved in that, whereby the brewer or the production manager was controlling the day-to-day running of it and looking after the shifts and the people who were working for you.
So the manager had the desk job, but you had the fun job being here with the guys making the whiskey.
That's correct. You're down on the grassroots and you were creating again, which I really love. But the present-day manager has to do all that now, which is fantastic for them.
It was great working with Dennis because he was always in the same humour. He was always, just full of energy, full of life. Always had something to joke about. Always laughing. It was just really a laugh a minute. It was fantastic working with him.
It's fun. Dennis keeps us on our toes. Funny, witty, mischievous maybe.
One of the tricks he used to play on us as shift workers was there was a setting, and it's just a setting in the stills, and we would congregate in the canteen, but we were only supposed to be at the canteen at certain times, and we weren't all supposed to be in the canteen. In the evening, you would hear an alarm, and you would rush out, and you say, "I bet you that's Dennis." But if it wasn't Dennis, you had to really find out what it was, but that was Dennis keeping us on our toes.
So when you got into doing the expansion, you must have had to make loads of decisions about how you were going to change things, if at all. And one thing I'm really curious to know is, why did you stick with the wooden washbacks?
Glen Grant was founded in 1840, and we had wooden washbacks then. So I'm a great believer in keeping tradition and innovation. So we kept the wooden fermenters so that we had the same style of fermentation. It'd been very easy to change to stainless steel, which would last forever, and didn't need the maintenance that these wooden ones do, but I still strongly believe that part of the character of Glen Grant comes from the bacteria that's left in these wooden fermenters.
During the expansion, the wooden washbacks weren't the only traditional pieces of kit that Dennis chose to retain. Glen Grant's very special in Rothes because it was the first distillery that was founded here. But I remember walking through the door of this still room many years ago, there was something else that I noticed straight away, and I think you'd have to notice when you walked in, that really sets Glen Grant apart from every other distillery in Rothes, but also pretty much every other distillery in Scotland, and that's these big guys here, these purifiers. So how come we've got them here and not at every other distillery?
Well, they end up Glen Grant Distillery because James the Major in 1873 doubled the distillery. He installed the purifiers on the wash and the spirits distillation. That's an empty cylinder between the lye pipe and the condenser. The boiling vapour of the lye pipe goes in midway, light vapour rises obviously, hits a cold head because we run cold water over it. The heavier ones reflux back into the still, and the lightest and purest goes over to make Glen Grant single malt. And that has been the situation since I came here 60 years ago.
So it's a really, really important part of the distillery character.
Yes, it is. It contributes to the character, the DNA of Glen Grant.
Luckily for Dennis, the world's leading fabricator of copper pot stills, Forsyths, has its headquarters just across the road from the Glen Grant. This family-owned coppersmiths, today run by the father and son team of Richard Forsyth and Richard Forsyth Jr., has built stills for almost every distillery in Scotland, and many more around the world.
Forsyths have been part of the makeup of Glen Grant since I started here, you know. Richard's father and possibly his grandfather before him had been here. So Richard has the drawings for the stills, and he produced all these stills for us as we required it for doubling up a distillery.
So you've got everything right on your doorstep that you need.
Local tradesmen doing local things, you know. It's nice to do that. We depend on the locals to come and run the distillery for us, so it's nice to reciprocate, and we all look after one another, you know.
And so, from washbacks to the stills, people to casks, Dennis developed a mastery of everything needed to create the fruity spirit that the Glen Grant is famous for. It's a house style that he's come to know inside out.
The character of Glen Grant to me is basically slightly dry in the nose, fruity, estery, with a nutty, fruity finish. And the purifier helps that character to be there for us all the time. The major in 1873 wanted to make it that way. He wanted it to be different. He wanted it still to be a single malt, but be different from others. You know, others were experimenting with blends, and he just wanted to keep his single malt, but put his own stamp on it.
I think you're completely right. It definitely stands out from other Speysiders. I think if you do a side-by-side tasting, you can always pick the Glen Grant out. So obviously, over the decades, you know, things have changed in the industry, and things have changed here. You know, there's even just practical changes made to the production process. But you said to me before that you feel that the distillery character has stayed the same from the day that you started here until today. How was that achieved?
It's achieved by keeping the same process parameters, and I can guarantee you that the spirit is the same quality as it was 60 years ago when I started. And days gone by, in the 50s and the 60s, you'll find that there's more sherry casks being used, so that had a different influence on the finished product. And we use more bourbon, but the character and DNA of this new spirit is still the same as the day I started here 60 years ago.
So when Douglas McKessock put you in charge of the Glen Grant Distillery, he wasn't just giving you the keys to whisky production and in time a big expansion project. He was also saying you've got to maintain these wonderful grounds that you've got here at the distillery. Was that a lot of extra work for you?
Yeah, it was a huge lot of work because we didn't have official gardeners then, you know. We just had to use our own men when they were free, and the whole site's 50 acres roughly, you know. But the gardens were important to him because his uncle John, who founded them for him, you know, so he really wanted to keep them like that way, you know. So, and I think it's important because our water for our mashing flows through this little stream called the back stream, which meanders through the garden, so it's protecting our water rights as well.
One of the projects on which I worked with was the restoration of Glen Grant's brand home, and the restoration particularly of the gardens, which were completely overgrown and derelict, and turning them into the wonderful place they are now was a project which was very close to his heart. He wasn't directly responsible for it, but he was really keen to do everything in his power to make it happen and to make it easy for the people who were doing it.
Not long after you'd completed the expansion of the Glen Grant in the 1970s, unfortunately the whole Scotch whisky industry went into a bit of a nosedive and into some pretty difficult times. As the manager of the distillery, was it quite difficult to keep people's spirits up?
Yeah, it certainly was, and at that time, in 1979, Seagrams, who owned Chivas, took over the company, and we then had 9 distilleries in the group. And we were very fortunate because the production director at that time wanted to keep the distilleries running as full capacity as possible. And that helped, you know, because people were worried about their jobs and all the rest of it. But I thought there was a strength in being a little bit bigger and having different brands, so we fared that quite well.
He had a lot of difficult management decisions. There was automation, there was a reduction of manpower. But he did that, and he did that, a lot of that. He was very sensitive to that.
There have been so many peaks and troughs, so many times. And Dennis's style of management certainly suited that, because he managed to keep everybody's morale up and whatever, because he is such a bouncy sort of happy-go-lucky sort of chap. But he also knows how to get the work done, and he's very hard-working.
How did things change otherwise once Chivas had taken over the distillery?
Well, with Chivas owning, they tried to mix the managers from Chivas 4 distilleries and the Glenlivet Distillers 5, blend the management together, so move us about, which was, to me, was a good thing, because it gave managers the opportunity to run different distilleries and gain more experience. But you'll understand some people possibly didn't think that was very positive, because they might have young kids at the school and it was disruptive. But I thought that was one of the strengths of being part of that. And I actually run the 9 distilleries from 92 to 2000, which was great for me, because I was still indirectly running Glen Grant, so I was still at home with Glen Grant.
I think what really came across in the years that I worked with him was, although he was responsible for all the distilling that was happening within Chivas Brothers at that time, 9 distilleries, his passion for Glen Grant Distillery and his enthusiasm for it.
So I believe at that time you really had your work cut out for you, because it wasn't just the malt distilleries they put you in charge of, but there was also some farms and a gin distillery as well, so they kept you busy.
It was quite a package, really. You know, there was 2 farms down beside Longbourn, 1 up at Glenlivet, a sheep farm up at Glenlivet, and a gin distillery down in Paisley. So I was kept busy.
So it sounds like you hadn't quite realised your dream that you'd had as a young lad about running the entire Scotch whisky industry, but I think that sounds like it's about as close as anyone could hope to get.
No, I still failed, I think. I still failed in that respect. Time runs out on you, you know.
Dennis gave me probably one of my biggest breaks, was that he recommended me to be a trainee brewer, and that was my first step in management.
Well, Alan came and worked on shift for us, and I saw huge potential in him, and so did the director who ran all of the Chivas Glenlivet Distillers, and they were looking for a trainee manager. And he asked if I had anyone that I thought was suitable. And I said, I've got a perfect guy for this job, but I don't want to let him give him away. And he says, you're not losing him, Dennis. He's going to be in with the company, and he'll still be there. So I said to Alan, and Alan went to be a trainee manager based over at Strathyla, you know. He was, as you say, he's turned out to be the most important master distiller in the industry, as far as I'm concerned. He is basically, to me, an encyclopedia of the industry.
There's a number of folk that I would count as mentors to myself, and certainly Dennis is one of those.
But Alan isn't the only person who's learned a thing or two from Dennis.
I've been working for Dennis now for about 14 years, and I've learned so much from him. I mean, he's a living, breathing encyclopedia. He's a natural, teacher, mentor. So I've been very lucky to, have spent, a large chunk of my career working alongside Dennis.
Oh, I've learned plenty from Dennis. First of all, how to pause when you're in a situation or you don't know what to do, or you kind of get agitated for some unknown reason. Keep cool, breathe, think, and then you will see, which way to go.
I was very, very fortunate to have such a good mentor, I think, because he's a very even-minded guy that steps back and looks at every situation before he decides how we're going to solve it or what we're going to do next, which that was a great learn for me, because I think I was a huge challenge for him to begin with, because I was maybe thinking too fast and he needed to slow me down a bit. So his great saying is that in time of crisis, there's 2 things that you do, is you switch off wherever the issue is and then you go and boil the kettle. Make yourself a cup of tea and then stop and think before you do anything else. And that's something that I learned from him many, many years ago. And to this day, it's still used here, and I've made sure all the guys know it as well.
I mean, he's a people person. I mean, for Dennis, there's 4 ingredients that make a great single malt Scotch whisky: water, malted barley, yeast, and the 4th ingredient is the right people. And really, Dennis has been able to bring the best out of people.
He's always asking about how your family's getting on and has concerns about everybody and everybody's well-being at the end of the day. And as I say, it's something that stuck with me. So when I got the opportunity to work with him as opposed to be down the bottom of the tree, I just took that as a great privilege.
And as one might expect, Dennis does enjoy sharing a dram with friends.
He likes to have a good time in the evening, like most of us do. One of the nice things, say, when Dennis took over here, he phoned up, says, I want to chat about some casks, could you get them down? So we had a chat, agreed on some casks. And then he says, I think we'll go for a walk up the garden. Oh, I says, okay, like the sound of that. So, of course, a walk up the garden means that you were going up to the safe. He would open up the safe, take out the bottle, pour a dram to each of us. If you wanted water, well, threw the copper dog down into the water, and that was it. He's been a good friend.
After many years running 9 distilleries and more besides that, change came again in the late 1990s when Dennis moved to Inverhouse Distillers to manage Balmenic Distillery. Little did he know, within a few short years he'd be back at the Glen Grant, as after purchasing the distillery in 2006, Campari Group came calling.
Well, I had a phone call from George Rossif, who was the MD for Campari for France and possibly taking over Glen Grant because it's in the UK, and asked me to come and speak to them. And obviously someone had told them about me, and I didn't need to think about it, because it was coming back home for me, So I came down and saw them and accepted the role of looking after putting Glen Grant back on the map again. It was brilliant. The nice thing about Campari buying Glen Grant was Campari were 100% behind the brand. They invested heavily behind the brand. I spent millions of their money buying warehouses, putting in hot water recovery systems for the environment, and then building a bottling hall on site. So the benefit of that is we are still in control of everything from production right through to the bottle for the consumer. It's a fantastic position to be in. The people who founded the place built dunnage warehouses because rack warehouses weren't there then. And Glen Grant has made its name on tradition and innovation. And I strongly believe keeping the tradition of using dunnage warehouse is the way forward. And that's why we bought the 11 dunnage warehouses and refurbished them to stock. The most of Glen Grant's stock is in dunnage warehousing.
With Campari investing heavily, the distillery restored to its former glory, and its whiskies growing in popularity, Dennis had one final task: to pick a successor who would continue to safeguard the Glen Grant long into the future.
When I arrived here, it was quite evident that Greg was the second Dennis sort of thing. He was going forward into that role.
Well, I had the experience of Greg many years before when I was running the Chivas distilleries and looked for him to come into production then. And then when I came to run Glen Grant, after about a year, I wasn't able to do everything myself because I was too busy. There was just 5 guys, so I needed an assistant. So Greg was a production operator then, and believe it or not, the 5 guys all applied for it. And Greg was my obvious choice, and he's very, very interested. He takes ownership of what he's doing. You can see by his attitude he wants to make Glen Grant shine, and most of all, he challenged me, which I really enjoyed because that made me think on things slightly differently, and he's done that to this day, so he is the perfect choice for succession planning for me.
He's some guy to work for. Some days you're never sure what was going to happen next. He would have some crazy ideas and some really good ideas, and we just had to get on with it and see how we got on. He likes to get his own way, or he did, and sometimes challenging him was a serious challenge. Though there was always a compromise to be found. He's a very professional guy.
It shows Dennis in a great light to think that he had the opportunity to pick the person and to mould that person to be his replacement and to be good enough to be that replacement.
In 2021, in recognition of his commitment to the Glen Grant and his incredible 6 decades in the whisky industry, it was decided that a very special sherry butt containing whisky distilled 60 years ago would be bottled in Dennis's honour.
Throughout
a process of maturation. Lots of different things can go very right or go very wrong, and 60 years is an awfully long time. You know, in that time, a whiskey could end up too woody, it could drop below 40%, it could leak, heaven forbid, and yet this one, you know, looks as good as the day it was coopered. What do you think made it special?
I think it's the quality of the wood, actually, you know, and the quality of the product that's been in it before, because it complements the spirit from Glen Grant very well. You know, it's a good marriage of sherry and Glen Grant, but it's a first fill sherry butt, and it's in excellent condition, as you can see. So I had never any doubt this was going to be a really nice finished whiskey. And whiskies that are single malts that are aged for a long time, 40, 50, 60 years, are normally done in bigger wood because it doesn't take on so much colour. You know, if it was a hogshead, it would have been completely black in colour, everything by now. But this is just about right. You know, a nice chestnut, vibrant chestnut colour, I think.
Do you think this one has any life left in it yet?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of life in it. There's more life in the butt than there is in me, because, and that's quite obvious, but it's a very, very good sherry butt. It's in good condition all over, so I wouldn't be frightened to refill it again for a second fill, you know. And I don't think I'll be around to announce it, but maybe Greg will do that.
So how does it feel to have this special 6-year-old whiskey bottled in your honour?
It's sad in a way, because the butt the cask looks better than me. No, I'm really proud to be involved in launching this, you know, because it's very much in the line of the style of Glen Grant when I started at Glen Grant, predominantly sherry, so it certainly reflects the style of Glen Grant at the time.
So obviously your dad worked here at the Glen Grant Distillery, and your granddad as well. If they were here today to see this milestone being marked with this special bottling, what do you think they'd say?
I don't know. I think I'm not saying that I've achieved that much. But what I'm saying is I'm carrying on the tradition that all my predecessors did. You know, they've laid the foundations of Glen Grant, laying down good wood, making good, consistent spirit into casks. So all I'm doing is carrying on the story. You know, it wasn't me that created this. I'm just the custodian of it just now, and someone else will do it after me.
Of course, this special bottling is just one thing Dennis will be remembered for, but those who've known him longest can say it best.
I think he's just a Rothes living legend, and he always will be.
He's Mr. Glen Grant, and he always will be, regardless of who comes after him or who's been before him. So in 60 years' time, there'll still be Mr. Glen Grant, will be Dennis Malcolm.
I think he'll be remembered for the things that he's done since he took over, which under Seagram, they didn't bother about spring water and all the old style, if you like. So I think Dennis will be remembered by Glen Grant for making sure everything was taken back to what it should have been.
He'll be a legend in his lifetime and beyond. We'll all remember his enthusiasm for years to come.
What Dennis does now is lay down stock for the future, so that future generations will enjoy, you know, the fruits of that labour. I mean, Dennis really has his sort of personality very much in the whiskey that he's been producing for the last 60 years.
I think there are very few now in the whisky industry like Dennis, these big charismatic figures that have been in it for so many years, and with such a wealth of stories as well as a wealth of knowledge. That they're people who are very keen to share their knowledge as well, which he is.
Though I've had the opportunity to meet many distillers in my time at Whisky Magazine, I don't think I've ever met anyone quite like Dennis. His presence can be felt not only at the Glen Grant Distillery, but in the town of Rothes, the region of Speyside, and the wider world of whisky. Like so many others, I feel privileged to have had the opportunity to spend some time in his company and rub shoulders with a living legend who has dedicated his life to Scotch whisky.
He will be remembered for, mainly I think, for his kindness, generosity, his selflessness.